When Denzel Washington walked into the room during Trump's speech, the energy shifted instantly. Trump paused mid-sentence, narrowed his eyes, and barked at security to remove him. But before they could reach him, Denzel had already spoken. In just 20 seconds, the atmosphere changed. What was supposed to be just another rally at the K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center in Dallas, with Trump as a headliner, turned into something entirely different. The ballroom had been packed, standing room only, and expectations were high that Trump would dominate the night. Backstage, security had been quietly doubled. As the lights dimmed and Trump made his familiar entrance, the crowd roared, though not everyone clapped. Then, from the edge of the press section, a figure emerged wearing a dark blazer and walking with measured steps. It took a moment for the audience to recognize Denzel Washington, the Oscar-winning actor and activist whose calm presence filled the space. No one had expected to see him there, let alone walking in solo during a live Trump event. Trump noticed him immediately, faltered mid-sentence, and asked into the mic what was going on. As security turned to intercept, Denzel remained calm and steady, walking slowly with purpose. One person shouted that he didn't belong there. Trump demanded action, but Denzel raised a hand, not in defiance but clarity, and asked for 60 seconds, promising to leave after. The room quieted. Something about his tone made even the guards hesitate. Denzel said he was invited by Representative Noah Harrove, who couldn't attend, and that he came in his place. He added that if the country needed dialogue, he was offering his. Trump tried to brush him off, suggesting he start a podcast, but Denzel remained composed. He said he wasn't there to perform or to be applauded, but because the country didn't only belong to those who clapped the loudest. That line landed. Trump was visibly annoyed and again called for security, but then a voice from the front row urged him to let Denzel speak, followed by another. The moment had gone off script. Trump finally allowed it, sarcastically inviting Denzel to say something brilliant. Denzel didn't take the stage, but stopped just below it, facing the crowd. He said he wasn't there to argue policy, because this had stopped being about policy long ago and was now about people and how we stop listening when we hear a name we don't like. He shared that he grew up in South Dallas, near the building they were in, and never imagined he'd be standing there asking just to be heard. He didn't ask for agreement, only for people to see each other as fellow Americans, not enemies. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was real. Even Trump didn't interrupt. Denzel gave a quiet nod and said that was all. Stepping back, the room still frozen in that moment. Slowly, a single clap echoed from the back. Then another. Not loud, but enough. Trump tried to reclaim the moment with a sarcastic remark, but the tone had shifted. Someone from the crowd stood and acknowledged Denzel with respect, even while disagreeing. Denzel nodded quietly. Trump, caught off guard, tried a joke, but the moment slipped from his control. Reporters rushed to upload video. Denzel calmly found a seat near the exit. No one escorted him out. No one dared. The attention hadn't moved on. Trump forced a smile and tried to return to his talking points, but it wasn't the same. Someone from the crowd called out, challenging him to respond to what Denzel had said. Trump froze, then said he didn't need to respond because it was just an opinion. Denzel stood again, turned back to the crowd, and said maybe some people came there needing to hear something different. Not better, not perfect, just different. Then he left quietly. But the moment didn't stay in that room. By the time Denzel reached the hallway, his phone had buzzed repeatedly. Inside, people were already talking, replaying clips. The first video dropped on Twitter within 2 hours and quickly went viral. Thousands of likes poured in. Headlines described it as a rare moment of unity. Even critics who usually disagree with Denzel were sharing the clip with respect. News networks, even those that rarely agreed, picked it up. Some pundits dismissed it as a stunt, but it didn't feel staged. There were no slogans or theatrics, just calm, steady words. That was what made it powerful. Later that night, back in Dallas, Denzel told his team he hadn't expected it to go that way. His aide reminded him he hadn't expected applause either, but he got some. Denzel replied that he wasn't looking for applause. He just wanted people to see a human being, not an enemy. His press manager noted that people were calling it a turning point, and even those who usually avoid politics were sharing it. Denzel reflected quietly that all he did was ask for 60 seconds without yelling, and that somehow became headline-worthy. As he made his way to his car later, a small group of attendees approached. One man jogged up, unsure at first, then admitted he hadn't come expecting to listen to someone from Denzel's side, but he had, and he was glad. He introduced himself as a roofing business owner from Temple who had always voted red, but was moved by what Denzel said. They shook hands. Denzel told him that listening was more than most were willing to do, but not everyone had been willing to listen. Backstage, Trump was pacing, furious. He demanded to know who had cleared Denzel in. An aide said he had used Representative Herou's credentials, technically making him a guest. Trump scoffed at the word technically, comparing it to hackers and criminals. He stared at a monitor showing Denzel's composed face and muttered that it had to be rehearsed. From the corner, his advisor Wesley Stokes finally spoke, trying to calm the situation by saying Trump hadn't lost a room. But even he sounded unsure. You didn't own it. Either that moment is everywhere now and nobody is talking policy. They're talking about him, Trump frowned, and said he's not the future, he's noise, but Wesley shrugged and replied, maybe, but noise travels fast. Trump waved him off and slumped into a nearby chair. Wesley continued. She didn't yell, didn't insult, just stood there like she belonged and played it different. There was a pause, and Trump leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke in a low voice. He had the room for A. Second, I'll give him that. Wesley blinked and asked if he respected what Denzel did, but Trump didn't answer. He just stared at the screen before finally saying, I respect strategy. Doesn't mean I won't tear down outside. Trump's campaign team scrambled to draft a response. Ignoring it was no longer an option because the clip had already aired on prime time. Meanwhile, Denzel sat alone in his living room with the lights low and his phone lighting up nonstop, full of unopened messages. One voicemail. Transcription from his mother stood out, saying, you did good, baby. Don't let them twist it. You spoke like a man raised right. He smiled faintly before a knock at the door pulled him back. It was Reuben, who stepped in with his laptop, saying they needed to talk about the invites. Town hall in Pennsylvania wanted him next week. PBS was asking for a one-on-one, and surprisingly someone from Fox wanted a segment. Denzel didn't answer immediately and finally said, I didn't do it for this. I just couldn't sit. Through another one-sided monologue about what real Americans want, like I'm not one of them. Reuben nodded and said, you didn't scream to prove it. That's why at work they sat in silence. Before Reuben asked if he regretted it, Denzel took a breath and said, I regret that it felt rare. I regret that speaking the truth quietly is now considered radical. Upstairs, the faint sound of a TV drifted from the guest room where his niece was staying, and on screen the moment played again with a news anchor, describing it as an unusual calm, a rare political moment that left the crowd and even the former president without a quick comeback. Somewhere in D.C., a campaign manager scribbled notes for a new ad. Somewhere in Florida, a donor quietly pulled funding. And in war rooms across both aisles, one question floated. If 60 seconds could shift a room like that, what would 5 do? But while political strategists dissected the moment, Denzel had already moved beyond it. 2 mornings later, he sat tucked in the corner of a small cafe in Oak Cliff, hoping for a quiet hour. But quiet doesn't last. Once the country decides you become symbolic. A barista recognized him first. Then a young woman in scrubs came and hesitated, and finally walked over to his table. She asked if he was Denzel, and when he looked up and lifted his eyes, she smiled and said she'd watched the clip 3 times. Her dad, a trucker who had always voted for Trump, got real quiet after hearing Denzel speak. She placed a folded note on the table, saying her dad doesn't do social media, so he asked her to write something down for him. Then she walked off. Denzel opened the paper and read a few words. I don't agree with you, but I listen. That's more than I can say for most. Later that afternoon, Denzel sat down for a local interview with journalist Shelby Dunn, who had covered Texas politics for over 2 decades. She said she had never seen a room stop like it did for him. Denzel paused and replied, I wasn't trying to stop anything. I just wanted to show up and say something I never hear at events like that it's okay to disagree without assuming somebody hates the country. Shelby asked if he was aware of the risk, and Denzel nodded, looked away for a moment, and said, yeah, but scared? No, I've been in far smaller rooms with far louder men. What scared me more was what would mean if I stayed silent. Shelby leaned in and asked if the reaction would have been the same if he had shouted, and Denzel answered without hesitation, no, that room Wasn't built for my anger. If I'd come in swinging, they would have tuned me out before I even said hello. But when I didn't raise my voice, they had to choose listen or walk out, and most of them stayed. Shelby leaned back, and Denzel exhaled slowly, saying, I don't want to become a moment. I want it to mean something. If people left that room thinking, maybe I should listen before I assume, then that's enough for me back at the convention, center the energy still. Hadn't returned to normal. Nobody was. Talking tax policy, they were talking about him, and that 1 minute of stillness. What lingered wasn't the applause, it was what came after. During a short break, a few people gathered near the coffee station from different counties. And with this conversation, Jasper Thorne, a Marine vet and lifelong Trump supporter, leaned against a pillar and said, I'm a Trump guy, always have been, but the way that man carried himself, it hit me different even in the next. Panel discussion, the moment echoed when state. Senator Colin Greer paused mid-topic and said, I wasn't going to bring this up, but if we pretend that didn't happen earlier, we're lying to ourselves. He looked around the room and said, Denzel Washington showed up, says truth and D.